All right, hello everybody, and welcome back to Through the Whistle Sports. My name is Campbell, and I'm here with my partner Joseph. And today we are going to be talking about a thought that I had a little while ago, and is it are big market teams pressured to build rosters that are in win now mode and not looking towards the future because of that big market, and they're pressured to do so. So, what do you think?
I think certain markets are, but I don't think their size correlates to the amount of pressure that is put on them. And I think the best example of this is the Orlando Magic, right? Florida in general is a huge market, but how much pressure is constantly put on them to be successful? Not a lot. I think what is the amount of international fans that you have. Right, so teams like the Lakers, teams like the Knicks, teams like the Warriors, teams like the Heat, teams like the Celtics, those teams are good franchises. So foreign people bandwagon them because their basketball is always fun to watch, right? But I do not think that in specific market size, or rather how big the city is you play in, has that big of an impact, right? And you see that a lot with like the secondary teams, right? So the Magic, the Nets, all the Kings. Like, when's the last time those teams, their front offices put pressure, or their owners put pressure on their front offices to succeed? Like the Nets were they still are, to be honest with you. They haven't done anything with Kyrie or KD or Harden or like they haven't done anything with it. But they made that one move, right? Jason Terry, Ray Allen, and Kevin Garnett for the picks that ended up becoming Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Like, I don't think it necessarily has to do with market size. I think it has to do with the amount of casual sports fans you have rooting for your team.
Yeah, and I think that you made up a good point with the Nets bringing up the Kevin Garnett trade, and like I when I first knew that basketball was even a thing, I would always see the Nets at the bottom of the East, and now I mean I think the picks have run out, so they have their own now, but I mean still
They don't.
they don't
They
have their
don't. They
picks.
traded them all for Harden.
That's
They traded them
true.
all for Harden.
I forgot about that.
So poverty teams stay poverty,
Yeah,
and international fans will never be fans of those type of franchises. It's only like the teams that are consistently good.
yeah, and I mean they have those two first round picks from Philly, but they won't be. They aren't lottery protected. Um,
They won't be. They won't be there. They will
yeah,
be very good. Maxi's emerging, like, right?
yeah, and like the age. Well, what interests me is that the ages of like teams like the 76ers, teams like the Brooklyn Nets, teams like the LA Lakers, they they had so many young emerging stars, and then around 2020, 2021, a lot of those teams changed for win now modes. um, for the Lakers they had, I mean, in 2018 they got LeBron James, but 2020 they got Anthony Davis. Um, they got Russell Westbrook from the Wizards. They signed Carmelo Anthony, who's, believe it or not, is actually 37 years old now. So that's just for the Lakers. And if you take a look at Philadelphia, I mean, James Harden is he's not getting any younger. He's 32 years old. Danny Green is 34. Paul Millsap, who they traded for, that I mean, that was just to make the money work. But he's 37. Joel Embiid is aging. I mean, you just look at these teams and they're so much older, and they aren't being as successful as the Memphis Grizzlies, as the
Mhm.
Warriors, who started out young and they aged together, which their success came with that aging. Um, and
So I do think that there are certain teams that have pressure on them from fans to be successful, and it is those fans who have had a taste of success thus far, right? So when Dwayne Wade retired, there was still pressure on the Heat to be competitive for the 8 seed, right? So everyone said, okay, what are we going to do? We obviously like our current young core. We like Bam. We like Josh Richardson. We like these guys that we have. They said, we need to be competitive. We're going to send Josh Richardson and go out and get Jimmy Butler. Now
yep,
that move ended up being really good, but we're seeing that teams that have not super smart GMs and are putting and they're crumbling from the pressure of the fans to be good, like the Lakers, like the Nets, right? Like they're they're making these huge trades to get superstars. But we've seen time and time again the best way to build a team is not to make a big superstar trade. It's to go get a piece from free agency, go draft well, make the right pick, build that team from the ground up, as we've seen with the Warrior or the yes, the Warriors, but also with the Grizzlies, like those kind of teams. Now we know the Grizzlies have, if they trade away Steven Adams, they have something like believe they have a max slot and then like a $20 million spot. That is insane. They just made the second seed, and if they
yep,
trade away a player who couldn't play for them in the playoffs, they will have a max spot. But you know what? Because of their location, people aren't going to want to play for them, which is my other point, which is that when you have such a large market, and you can go out in free agency and your fans believe you can get anybody, then there's a ton of pressure on the front office to deliver and get anyone they want, right? We saw it with the 2019 off season, I believe. That was the year all the Knicks fans went crazy and said we're getting KD, Kyrie, and Zion. Look how that turned out. You have to build up your foundation, and fans have a delusional perspective of how teams are built. And when front offices crumble to that and they just do whatever fans say, that is when things go wrong. That's when Russell Westbrook gets traded to LA. That's when the Nets give up all their future picks and future All-Star Jared Allen for an aging Harden who hadn't been the same because of a hamstring injury.
yeah, and I think that trading like that trade for Kevin Garnett for the Celtics is, it worked out for them, and they didn't use those picks to try and play a win now mode. Um, you know, what they did was they kept a hold of those picks, drafted well, and at one point they'd made the number one seed, got to the Eastern Conference Finals. It was Game 7 of Eastern Conference Finals. They lost against the Cavs, and then they got the first pick in the draft. That is like, instead of using that pick um, to go out and win now mode, they now have put themselves in a good spot where it's a very real possibility that they win against the Heat this year and make it to the finals. Um, and I think that the young core that they have compared to the aging core of the LA Lakers just shows that success, because with the Boston Celtics and the Memphis Grizzlies, they're able to grow together, go through heartbreak together, tough losses, tough blowouts, um, things like that. And I think that they're able to age together and grow from that, and are able to get out better on the other end compared to other teams such as the Nets and Lakers that didn't have that chemistry to start.
I think it shows just how valuable draft picks are, right? So we've seen the two ends of the spectrum, right? We've seen the Thunder trade away literally everything they own material wise and get as many draft picks as they can, except they held on to Shea. That is it. We've also seen the Lakers go out and literally give up draft capital to get Russell Westbrook, right? We've seen them go get Anthony Davis. That entire team, could you imagine that core if they had kept the players together? Right? If they had D'Lo, if they had Lonzo, if they had Julius Randle, if they had Brandon Ingram, if they had even some lesser known players, if they had Thomas Bryant, if they had I don't know how to say it, Zubats, if they had those kind of role players on that current Lakers team, and then they had spent their free agent money wisely, we could be looking at a whole new Lakers team now. And now that does bring into question, well, are there certain environments where young players cannot learn and cannot grow? Right, like I know you bring up the Philly thing, like okay, Matisse Thybulle is probably gone because it's impossible for him to risk it and learn to shoot. I think that's a viable question. Like, are there situations where players simply cannot grow, and that feeds into this narrative of the pressure, right? So instead of trading away the draft pick for that player, they trade away that player 2 years into their contract because they're being disappointing instead of developing them, right? We saw Lonzo at the very beginning of this year. He got paid $20 million. Everyone thought at the time that was an overpay, but it could turn out to be a good contract because Lonzo is still so young and has all-star potential because he was a second overall pick. He was a absolute clamp god for the first half of the year. Brandon Ingram gets traded from the Lakers immediately becomes a bucket. Right? There are all these different players who have not succeeded in these organizations, and it's because of the fan expectations, the looming pressure that puts on the front office. Because when a fan expects the front office to make incredible moves and then they make a mistake, they don't have an opportunity to take a step back and re-go at it. Rob Pelinka could be fired this offseason, right? There's so, like we don't know what's going to happen. And it's the same thing with head coaches, right? It's like it's why nobody wants this Lakers job because if this year fails, do you think they're going to keep you around for another year? No, what they're going to do is they're going to fire you. They're going to trade AD. They're going to trade LeBron. They're going to let Russ walk. They're going to re-sign Malik Monk or whatever it may be, and they're going to tank. They're going to tank because they only owe one more pick to the Pelicans, I believe. It's a swap best in either 2024 or 2025. So
Yeah.
if they tank those years and just accept that, hey, one of these picks we're not going to have, and that's a cost for a championship, that coach is not going to stick around. It is the pressure that is put on both coaches and front offices and players by the fans that makes things so much harder for teams to grow, develop, and build the right way. Because when you have this idea that we have like 3 years, we have 3 years to be a championship contender, you're not going to draft RJ Barrett. They had the fourth pick. You're not going to be like, all right, we have a good young core. We have LeBron. We're going to sit here and draft Darius Garland and wait 3 years for him to become any kind of NBA player because he was like the worst player in the league for years. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah, and the LA Lakers are such like a good example because of the amazing success that they've had since they joined the league, and I think that they've only had like 8 losing seasons in their entire history,
It's something ridiculous like that.
and like seven of them have come in like the past 9 to 10 years or whatever. I can't remember the exact thing, and
It's
like
like post Kobe
yes,
retirement, they've had four, and before that, it was like two or three. They
yeah,
draft they used to draft really well outside the lottery.
yeah, and I think it's also another thing with Lakers media is Taylor Horton Tucker is a player that I actually really like still, and I think he has good potential if he gets moved outside of Los Angeles because the Lakers media specifically, they like to build a player up and then just as easily they like to tear the player down. That happened
There
with Horton Tucker. That happened with Westbrook.
happened.
Westbrook.
If you want to go back years,
Yeah.
that happened with Kwame Brown.
Yep.
That
And it's
happened
like,
with Lonzo. That happened with Ingram. That happened with hell, Julius Randle, D'Angelo Russell, Jordan Clarkson. Do you know how many good NBA players there are that the Lakers media tore down and like goes other places where their team and media is supportive of them? The number one example I go to is Killian Hayes on the Detroit Pistons. That man was came into the league and had the most expectations on a ninth pick I have almost ever seen. Because the team was bad, they needed a savior. The city's just been a bad sports city for years. He was so disappointing. And now you know what they're doing? They're like, look, this is what we have with him. And you know who we're gonna think you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna compare him to the current defensive player of the year. Because he is tall, he is big, he has these defensive instincts, and that's what we like about him. You know what the Lakers did? They said, it's Magic Johnson. Nope, now he's Trey Burke because he's terrible, can't shoot, and is only slightly above average on defense. It's like a lane.
yeah.
I mean,
And it's like with Austin Reeves, like he didn't have any of those expectations because he was undrafted, and you saw what he put up when he didn't have that pressure on him. He put up a triple double, an undrafted free agent signed with the Lakers, and he got a triple double. Yes, the Stars were out at the end of the year because they are out of playoff contention, but 23 years old, and I think um, I think that the media for specific teams may be the more reason, maybe more of a reason for the teams trying to get immediate success more than the actual market. I think that's pretty fair to say.
so a lot. I want to dig deeper into that because I think that might be a good point, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm trying to grasp it. I the media feels like a of what's the word? It's like a the media feels like a microphone to the fans' voices,
Yep.
right? So like okay, I don't consume much small like beat writer stuff. I also don't consume much ESPN because honestly, their reporting is all biased towards the larger historically more successful teams, right? They kept running the narrative that the Bulls could be a championship contender, even though the Bulls literally won like two singular games against against teams who made the playoffs, like top six seeds in both conferences, which is just an insanely low number. I mean, there were teams like the Jazz in there, but do you think that they put pressure on a like a all of them together, or do you think there's like the media specific when a organization sees a hit piece on their front office, right? Like you think the Jazz front office don't see everyone calling them terrible at their job right now? Like that
Yeah.
is definitely something they see. Do you think I guarantee you the fans are on their side. Fans want them to run it back next year. The majority of them. A few of them want them to clear up cap space by getting rid of Mike Conley. But other than that, they're like, run it back next year. Let's see what we can do. I think it could, I think it's a compilation of media and fans, as well as not being able to handle the pressure, as well as coaches not being able to handle the pressure. I think just the whole dynamic, the like pressure it puts on organizations, nobody knows how to deal.
Yeah.
Like when you're winning, everything's going right. When you're losing, nothing is going right. And I think that's something that people don't realize. And when you have a million people or like 2 million people, 3 million people in a single city, it's hard to avoid that, especially when everyone knows who you are. It's the same thing we were talking about with refs. They have Twitter.
Yeah. And I think the you brought up the good point of like specific media and not like the national or like the ESPN. Like I think that the local media for the teams do put up like a big like it depends on where they are because like Philadelphia they I hate to bring him up, but Markel Fultz, he had pressure from both the Philadelphia media on top of the ESPN media, and like other media outlets, and he gets traded to Orlando with less coverage from both ESPN. You just don't hear about it much anymore, and maybe people have moved on. Maybe it's just old news. And he was playing really well before his ACL tear, and almost no one was talking about it then. And I think they were the number one seed as well before he went down. And he was
They were really
averaging,
good for a good 3 weeks, I believe. They were like
yeah,
top of the conference. They were
yeah,
like third place 7 games into the year, I believe. Because I remember the Bulls were
yeah,
7-0, the Cavs were like 5-2. Like though it was a good stretch for them. And then he went down, and the entire team got deflated, and they lost a ton of games.
yeah. And I think that like I mean, even the upset victory against Milwaukee in the first round, game one in the bubble, I mean, people say that Milwaukee is bad during game ones, which I somewhat agree with. But I mean, like, I consider him the quarterback of that victory. He had, like, I think he had 15 points, 10 assists, and right now he's one of the best uh, assist players. His shooting has still not improved
I'd put
drastically, but I
I would
think,
put LeBron, I would put Curry, I would put Chris Paul, put Giddy over him.
yeah,
Other than that,
and people just don't recognize him in
don't think
Orlando.
there are as many guys who can do that because, like, obviously there's like Drew Holidays, right? But Markel Fultz doesn't have that like elite offense yet, like that shot creation ability. So it's like once he gets that, how good could he be? But the media will not recognize that until he wins like a player of the week. The media is super biased towards like actual awards. Markel Fultz didn't win Rookie of the Year, not even close. He didn't. I don't even think he made a rookie team, did he?
No, he was
I
out
think he made
from.
second team.
Yeah, he played like probably not even 30 games with the 76ers before he got traded because of his
No.
injuries. Um, and I mean, his shot creation, if that's what they built it up to be, if he had what the media built it up to be before he got drafted and the Sixers kept him and he played great like that, I honestly believe that the Sixers could have a championship by now, let alone like say Tyrese Maxey's out of the equation. Like the big three, that's exactly what they needed. Markel Fultz, a shot creator. Ben Simmons, basically do it all.
LeBron, right?
Yeah.
Obviously
the next,
LeBron.
yeah, the next LeBron, then Joel Embiid, who,
Next
I mean,
team.
yeah, who like he was carrying that team until Simmons and um, Fultz got there, but I think
And that brings me to something else.
Yeah.
When we're doing our like player comps, there's a reason we do ceiling, expectation, and then floor. You guys will see that soon, but that there's a very specific reason. It's because if you give a player comp and you only give their ceiling, people are going to automatically expect them to be that, right? So we can give our expectation, right? And then we can give how bad they could be so that people understand, hey, as great of a scorer as this guy could be, right? He could be Devin Booker, but he could also be like Admiral Schofield. Like he could be bad. And but fans don't understand that. They want to know how good is this guy going to be. They want to be able to go on 2K and see, okay, this guy's potential is 86. He's going to reach his peak at age 26. That's not how basketball works. Fans have an unrealistic perspective of how front offices run. They have an unrealistic perspective of how potential and ceiling works, right? DeMar DeRozan just hit his peak. Like this past season, he was the best he's ever been. He wasn't DeMar DeRozan in the playoffs. He had like one bad game, I believe. Um, and that is why front offices shouldn't listen to fans because fans don't know what they're talking about. But yet we have Harden getting moved for 6 first-round picks and 6 pick swaps. We have Anthony Davis getting moved for 4 first-round picks, 4 former top 2 picks. Like I think that era is over. I think the era of trading all your draft capital for superstar level talent is over. I think people understand what you need is a superstar, great two-way wing, above average big man, shooters, defensive depth, good head coach, and you can be a championship level team. You have your superstar in Steph Curry. You have your two-way wing in Andrew Wiggins. You have shooters in Clay, Poole. You have your defensive leader in Draymond. You have Kevon Looney, right? You can apply that mold to almost every team remaining, right? Except for maybe the Mavericks. So either you need that generational talent, you need that LeBron, you need that Giannis, you need that Luka, you need that MJ, you need that Kareem, or you need a well-built team. And even in the way you get that superstar, it's by building that team well. Regardless, you need that top 5 pick to get that guy.
And I think that teams are obviously going to try to continue to build super teams. There's no doubt about that. I don't. They're not going to work.
I
That's
don't
clear
agree.
now.
I think we might have seen the end of it. I think the only teams that are going to continue to attempt to build super teams are large market teams
Yes.
who have not seen success. And even then, I question whether that will actually happen. I think the only teams that will are teams who have not tasted success in so long that they're going to do whatever it takes to get it. So that I think that concludes it, right?
Yeah.
Large market teams are 100% pressured
Yes.
because of their market by the fans, by the media, by the ownership, maybe. I
Yeah.
mean, do we think the Bus family was happy with this year?
No, they came out and said that I forget their exact quote, but they weren't too
Mm,
happy going over. Did they even go over the luxury tax? I think they did a little bit, but they didn't want to more for
they
John
did.
Wall.
They went over a lot.
Yeah, and they
Went
didn't.
over by like 20 million,
Yeah, and they didn't.
15 million, something like that.
And they didn't want to go over more for John Wall, even though that we don't know if it would have worked, but it was definitely worth a
Wouldn't
shot.
have. Fans don't understand that either. Once you get over like 10 million, I believe it is, it's
Yeah,
$5 for every dollar you spend. Last year, the Warriors were like 43 million over. Kelly Oubre was the most expensive single season rental of all time. You were essentially paying Kelly Oubre $50 million. He had a $10 million contract, and since he was putting you another 10 million over the luxury tax when you were already 30 million over,
yeah,
he was like the most expensive player ever. more expensive than Curry,
Yeah.
more expensive than Harden. Like that's insanity.
Yeah, and the Bus family is just I think that they were right in that they didn't want to go over, but at the same time they had what they had, and they were disappointed in how the front office got the team together and having them go over the luxury tax. But I mean, this is where they're at now. They've got an agent.
I have a take for you.
Yeah,
Take for you. If the Lakers had kept their core of Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma, just that one, right? Like the season after Braun got there. Don't forget about the Julius Randles, the D'Los, the Clarksons, the Zoo, like all those players. The year after they tried it out with LeBron and they got the fourth pick, they had traded LeBron away. They had traded it for a Ben Simmons, if they had traded it for a Donovan Mitchell, hell, if they had traded it for another top 10 pick and made the correct selection, gotten like future draft capital, and in the coming off season spent that money correctly, as in get role players that fit alongside Brandon Ingram, get role players that fit alongside Lonzo Ball, they would be champions every other year for the next decade.
yeah, because
Brandon Ingram is that guy. You could
yeah,
have traded LeBron for the number one overall pick at that point. You could have had Zion, could have had Ja. You could have had those guys if you really wanted to, but instead you chose to keep Brandon, or you chose to keep LeBron and to make LeBron happy. Not only did you sacrifice your future down the road, but you kind of sacrificed the present. Brandon Ingram is really good right now. Lonzo Ball, minus his potential career-ending injuries, is really good right now. Kyle Kuzma, you watch the Wizards, he's really good.
he
Josh
cared.
Hart,
Yeah,
he had a 40-point game to end the season. There's a ton of trade value.
yep,
These Zubac, while he had that one bad year on the Clippers where he like got exposed in the playoffs, he's been really good. And they sacrificed their window of the next 10 years for 1 year. And I think teams like OKC, I think teams like the Pacers, I think those teams who recognize right now that they need to take a step back and try and get that next Luka, that next Giannis, that next Nikola Jokic, that next Joel Embiid are doing it right.
yeah. I mean, they sacrificed the next 10 years for one championship, and I I do think that that championship or and that bubble run was fair. I don't think that it was skewed to the extent that people are saying it was, but
Mm.
that was 1 year. That was one championship for a decade of playoff contention, possible championships that they gave up, and I think that they did that because not just LeBron, though he played a big part in wanting um, the, those players around him, but the market getting impatient and the media of the Lakers, um, they also got impatient because they expect success. And that's I th- I think that almost brings us to the conclusion of it. And so our big market teams pressured to make win now moves.
Before you end, I
Yeah,
am looking for one article. There is an article in 2019 that asked what is LeBron James's trade value, and they proposed a ton of potential LeBron James trades. And if I can find that article, it would be very, very good. Here it is. Great. LeBron James, Ben Simmons, where is it? Yeah, so that was a rumor. LeBron James for Ben Simmons, then picks and pick swaps over the next like 5 or 6 years. Like, obviously, Ben Simmons is not what we thought he was. Yes, but
Yeah, I'd say so.
is he's he's really
He's
those picks. Even if you have him, there was a potential Lakers, there's a potential Bulls deal for Zach LaVine, Lauri Markkanen. There's a ton of stuff here where it's like these had been discussed at the time. I think looking at it like from a reaction. I don't know what the word is. Trading LeBron would have been the right decision, but they didn't do it, so we'll never know what the actual right decision was. They crumbled to the pressure of LeBron. They crumbled to the pressure of Lakers fans who were super disappointed in the down year that LeBron had that season. And they pulled a terrible trade for an injury-prone big man who is probably was never the same as he was on the Pelicans as he was on the Lakers. Right? Even in that
yeah,
bubble run when he was taking like jump shots to win games. The old Anthony Davis would have backed him down and got a wide open dunk because he is that much bigger, that much better, that much stronger than you.
yeah. Yeah, I think that it's so our initial question of are big market teams pressured to make win now trades because of their market? I think it's yes, but that's not the only factor. I think it has to do with the media. I think it has to do with the front office. I think it has to do with the players. I mean, take a look at
Yes, they're
you take a look at Joel Embiid. He wanted Bradley Beal. He wanted
Look at
James Harden.
Giannis. Look at Giannis. When you have
Yes.
Giannis, he's about to get a supermax contract. What do? You go out and you send like 3 first-round picks for Drew Holiday.
Yes.
There's so many instances of just pressure mounting on front offices, and they have to make a split-second decision. They have to go out and make their move. The only team, the only teams who don't do that, like the Kings, and they just got the pressure put on them this year. We might see for the first time a top 4 pick get moved for a
Yes.
player who plays for a team for 1 season
Yep.
because that pick is likely getting traded.
Yeah, I think so too. And um, yeah, I think so. I think it is a lot of factors. So when I initially came up with this question, my first three teams that I thought about were the Lakers, the Nets, and the 76ers. But now looking at it more and looking at the situation that they were in, the players that they got, and the front office that they have, it's not just that the market um, requires them to be in win now mode, but it's also the fans expecting it. It's also the players like LeBron James on
The
the
other thing is the
Lakers.
social narrative around them. I can't believe I went this
Yes,
entire time without mentioning the Clippers. The Clippers had Blake
yes,
Griffin, Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan all hating on their owner. Their owner was forced to sell the team, and then the team was never the same from that moment on. They had like average role players. They had Lou Will, Pat Bev, they had Montrezl Harrell. Like those are just average. They made the decision to try and go win now. They got Paul George, they got Kawhi Leonard. Time will only tell how that ages for them because they've obviously been injured, but all those things are true. Situation matters more than just market size when it comes to this
yeah.
topic.
I yeah. So I think that when I initially thought of this, I thought of it just from like a specific, or like not a specific, more like a broad standpoint of just like, oh, this means this because of X, Y, Z. But I think that there are a lot of more reasons for stuff like this to happen that I just didn't think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, so I know that this is a bit of a shorter episode today, but this is all that we had planned for today. So once again, we hope you consider subscribing. It really makes a difference. We can't say it enough. We're going to be coming out with some more NFL news as the NBA season comes to a close, and as well as NBA draft prospects once the draft gets a little bit closer. And until then, again, we hope you consider subscribing, and thank you all for watching. Have a good one.